Now, this is an interesting topic today because it's going to be all about the number one requested topic, which is so weird. There's been other topics that was definitely requested a lot, but I don't no idea why. But this one was requested a lot by a lot of people. That is the Dungeon of Doom. Are you shocked by people actually requesting to want to hear about the Dungeon of Doom?
I'll tell you, John, it's grown uh, in the last few years. I mean, it was to me a very, it hurt my career, but I did it for I believe, the best reason to convince Hulk he could trust me and turn him heel. And that's why I took all his friends and put them in one, lumped them in one group. But it's taken a life on its own. And I guess people are seeing for what it was, comic relief, tongue in cheek, and you know, I for some reason it's become like, to me it's the Plan 9 from Outer Space done by Ed Woods. You know that movie?
Yes.
That's what it
Yeah.
is. And now Plan 9 from Outer Space is one of the cult classics of all times.
So if you think about this, basically 95 to 97 is the run of the Dungeon of Doom in WCW. This big heel faction, of course, you had the Four Horsemen going along at that time too. More the serious guys. The Dungeon of Doom were more almost cast out of the 80s. But the kind of fruition, or kind of how it started, was the three faces of fear. It was you, Beefcake, and John Tenta, who was the Avalanche. So
Right.
when you guys put that group together, that's specifically when it's starting. It's like Hogan loves Avalanche. Hogan knows you forever. Hogan loves Beefcake. Is that like what's going on here? He wants to work with those three guys?
Yeah, and if you look back, I had a lot of heels hurt, and Rick was hurt or in contract negotiations. Uh, Enough heels, and I had to keep the spotlight on Hogan. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And he was comfortable with Brutus and John, and John was a wonderful human being. Brutus is a good guy, but John was a wonderful human being, and he was Hulk was really comfortable with those two guys. So I said, okay, we gotta put our finger in the dike right now, and he had drawn money with John and Brutus being his dear friend. It put him at ease too. I didn't have to put him in there with somebody he hadn't worked with, that he might not have been comfortable with, and that's where we went.
So the interesting thing that happens here is you hear a voice in the arena, Sullivan, Sullivan, come to me, Sullivan. And this
I
guy,
saw.
yes, my son, Sullivan, my son, keeps calling you. We eventually find out this mysterious voice is the master, the leader of the Dungeon of Doom, I guess, the prince, King Curtis, right? I mean, is this just you had a relationship with him, wanted to bring him in, thought he'd be good for the role? How did he get into WCW at this point?
John, guys from my era, whether it be Dusty, whether it was Billy Graham, whether it was Ric Flair, the greatest talk of all times was King Curtis. And he was beloved in the wrestling business. And as Curtis said, I want one more trip on the Milky Way. And I actually brought the idea to Hogan, and Hogan loved it because Hogan and King were very, very close. King was a tremendous athlete, and Curtis was went to school at UCLA Berkeley and was an orator. So that's where, I mean, there's a fabulous story when Hawaii was a territory in the early '60s. They had a minute left to go, and this is in the early days of being able to follow ratings. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And they had a minute left to go. The show was short, and Ed Francis sent Curtis out there, and Curtis counted backwards from 60 to 1, and the ratings went up.
Wow.
He was such a commanding presence. And I mean, the other thing, I suggest that our friends look at is King was a fabulous worker, whether he was a babyface or heel. He was dead ass serious. But he had gone to New York before. I didn't he manage Kamala? You
Yep.
know,
I think
and
at one point briefly, I know he was in WWF for a cup of coffee, so they say.
yeah,
Yep.
and Hulk brought him in then, and the great white Bengal tiger and all that stuff. Curtis
Hmm.
really got Hulk over, and I think Hulk wanted to repay him a favor, and rightfully so.
At first, I was like, "Who is this guy, this master?" And then I realized, like, "Oh my god!" Yeah, I was like, "Okay, now we know who this is." And he's going to bring you on, going to christen you the Taskmaster. Is that a gimmick and a name that you're going to come up with that you
Oh, that
created?
was Hogan's. That was Hogan's.
So, how involved is he with creating Dungeon of Doom?
Well, he actually came up to me and said, "What can you do for my people?" So I understood my job. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yep.
And uh, the other thing was, during this time we had started to make the real turn to seriousness, and I still wanted to keep some of the WWF fans who had been used to the cartoon type characters.
Yep.
The main thing was I wanted him to feel comfortable with me. I mean, just think about this at the time. Could I have put him with Brian Pillman?
He would have been on the fence about it. Yeah.
No, it wouldn't have been on the fence. There was been a definite no.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Okay. True.
Yeah. And because, and this is no disrespect, his work was completely different than Hulk's. And at this period, you got to remember, John, when Hulk first came over, he got off that movie, not movie, the TV show, Thunder in Paradise.
Yep.
Did you ever take a real good look at him when he first came in? How thin he was?
Very skinny. He literally looked like he may have lost like 50 pounds of muscle compared to his WWF days, where he was what 303 or whatever he was. I mean, he was gigantic in WWF.
Right. And the other thing was, where I caught it was when he started to do interviews, he was hunching over. I thought, and this is just me, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I thought he lost confidence.
Hmm.
Well, he walked over from the other side. And like you said, he lost 50 pounds of muscle. And I was really cautious about this. I'd never brought up Brian Pillman. The reason why I mentioned Brian Pillman, I mean, I had a great angle with Brian. Not only when Brian passed did we lose a great wrestler, we lost one of the greatest would have been minds of all times. And when we talked about feuds, John, we would have started and ended with Austin and Pillman, right?
Hmm.
I mean,
Yep.
we're talking about the gun angle, right?
Yep.
How intense Brian was. And I think if I brought that up, Hogan, again, I'm just surmising this, he would have said, what's he trying to do to me? How would Hulk at that time work with Brian Pillman? Later on, when Brian got over, he wanted to work with Brian.
Right. Of course.
But, of course, everybody did, right? But there wasn't a lot of guys I could throw at him at that time. So I came up, and again, like I said, Rick was hurt. I'm not sure if Barry had gotten hurt, but I was short heels. So I said, hey, my long range goal is to turn this guy heel, which he was dead set against, and make him feel comfortable that I'm doing the right thing for him. So that's that's how the three faces of fear came.
So it's almost like you got to get uncomfortable. Wrestle Flair first. I mean, they had some great matches, him and Flair. I mean,
Yeah.
really better than their WWF matches because their WWF matches are good but not great. The WCW matches were actually a lot better.
Can I tell you why I think that too? And
Hmm.
I think you hit on the head. Rick was more over in WCW than he really was in WWF. Would you concur?
Yes.
Yeah. And so hey, when you're over in a place like Rick was and Hogan was, the matches are going to go tremendous usually, and you feel a lot more comfortable when you know you're over Rick. And during this time, as you remember, Rick was making some of the greatest interviews in history,
Hmm.
and and we're basically a Southern company, and it was a little bit of a civil war, the North against the South, and I think if you listen to the tapes back then, and the production company uh, did a hell of a job of browning out some of the boos from Hogan because he's in Rick's, home place.
Yep.
I think, and the other thing was during this period, there were two of the biggest stars in the history of the wrestling business, and I think Rick said, "I'm going to show there's no animosity. I'm going to go out and bust my ass and make Hulk look the best he's ever been in WCW," and I think he did that.
No doubt. They had some great matches, especially when he first came in '94. They had some really good matches. What is your relationship with Hulk here? Because, on screen, obviously, you're the guy pushing the end of Hulkamania. You got to kill Hulkamania. What's your relationship like with him off camera, off screen? You guys have a good relationship?
Yeah, I knew him from the very beginning. When he was in Tampa, starting to be a wrestler, and I had gone for a couple of shots when he was in Continental in Pensacola, and yeah, yeah, he was. We had a great relationship.
Were you ever surprised at all that he became, the Babe Ruth of wrestling? Did you foresee that? Were you surprised at all? They're like, wow, I can't believe, this young punk I knew from Tampa is the biggest star in the business.
If I said I thought it would happen, I'd be lying. But he was, once that Rocky movie hit, it
Yep.
changed the dynamic. And before that, because I believe at that time, wasn't he in AWA?
Yep.
He wrestled in, I think it was Dothan, Alabama, as Sterling Golden, I think. I may be wrong, but he came off that Atlanta TV at one time as Sterling Golden. And he went to Pensacola area and he drew a huge house. And I believe it was with Holly Race. And I mean, when I say a huge house, this is Dothan, Alabama. I think they had 20,000 people in outside stadium in Dothan, Alabama.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it's funny
So,
too, because if you go back to AWA, you watch those shows when he beats Bockwinkel for the title, and they reverse it. The crowd is
yeah.
like deflated. I mean, they're not happy. Like they were literally go nuts that he won, and then like deflated. So Vern almost a little bit too much of a stop and start with Hulk. He had something there, and he didn't realize it.
Well, I think it is that a lot of people don't know the history. You know, he had made a deal with Vern that he could work in New Japan, and Vern wanted, I think, 50% of his merchandise and a
Oh,
booking fee from New Japan. So I think it was one of those things where you give the guy the carrot and then take it back. And I thought, I've thought about this a lot, John. And this is why I go back to Eddie Graham being such a smart guy. When the regional territories really start popping up was after the Chicago national TVs, right?
yep.
I mean, they always had uh, they always had regional territories, but back in those days, guys coming off the Chicago tape when they were booked, like we'll say in Boston and New York, Dick the Bruiser, he would say in a little circle, TV star.
Hmm.
So
Right.
it was like when 17 started and Tommy Rich would go to, other territories, they were coming to see Tommy. And what happened was all those guys that took over the regional territories were wrestlers. Bob Geigel in Kansas City and Pat O'Connor. Vern, Dick the Bruiser, the Sheik, one of my dearest friends. Uh, the Fields in the Fields brothers in Continental. Before it was Continental, it was Gulf Coast. Uh, Bill Watts when he went to Louisiana. All of them were wrestlers. The only one that followed Eddie's pattern is Eddie was through wrestling full time and made, other wrestlers. Eddie didn't put himself on top unless he was a special referee or he was in a 6-man with Mike or something. The rest of those guys couldn't let go and couldn't get the younger guys over. And they didn't want to. And it's if you look back what I'm saying to you, here you have Wilbur Snyder and Dick the Bruiser. They're the World Heavyweight Tag Team Champions. Bruiser's the world champion in his part of the world. Vern's the world champion in his part of the world. The Sheik is the U.S. champion in his part of the world. And none of them put guys over. And Vern looked old when he was 30.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's
Yep.
when I think really hurt Minneapolis. And I'm sure some people disagree with me, but as great a performer as Dick Bockwinkel was, and you hit it on the head when you said the fans were very disheartened with those finishes. They killed their own. Nick was like I said, a fabulous worker, but he was in his early 50s. It was time to give it to Hulk and time to let the young guys get over. And I think we saw that. I'm not going to say without Hulk, Vince wouldn't have been able to do it, but it would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, no doubt.
He would have been
So
able to follow that path of the rock and wrestling connection and movie stars.
I think with Hulk though, everybody else fell into their rightful spot. Piper number 1 heel, Orndorff kind of like that number 2 heel. Like I feel like everybody fell into the right spot with Hulk at the top.
Right.
Now, going back to WCW '95, so Beefcake at this point, when the Master is kind of coming into this, he's the man with no name. He went from the Butcher to man with no name. He's got a million different names. I feel like they're all like Hogan creations as far as
Right.
the names. Who's is like the man with no name, the Butcher, the Booty Man, like all these crazy names. Is that all Hogan saying like that's what he wants, or is Beefcake pushing that?
And it was, I'm sure Butcher, not Butcher, but Beefcake and Hogan got together and came up with the names. Let me tell you a side story about the Butcher. That cost WCW, I would think, I'm just surmising again, estimating, $100,000 because Abdullah the Butcher sued them and
Oh,
won.
didn't know that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So well, technically, I guess he owns the name.
The
Obviously,
Butcher
Abdul the Butcher. So you couldn't use anything Butcher, the Butcher, anything like that.
using in lawsuits that call it too similar. There's another word before too something and similar. Is it?
Hmm.
I was
Interesting.
involved. I had the gym.
Didn't know that. That's interesting. So eventually, he's going to become the Zodiac, which is
Right.
perhaps the weirdest of all these gimmicks in the Dungeon of Doom. The yes, no, the face paint, the weird haircut. Whose idea is this? You creating that?
No, that was Hulk and Brutus. You
What did
know,
you think of it?
well, I like Brutus. He always looked good, but they were so joined at the hip. You had to do what Hogan. He had creative control. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I think if Brutus had taken one name, I mean, whatever they could come up with and get away with close to Beefcake, you know what I mean? Whether it be something else, They should have done that because once they lost that lawsuit, I'm sure they're getting pressure on from the North Tower saying, "Hey, don't ever make a mistake like that again." You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because they
I
went
just,
to court.
just think the Zodiac, the gimmick is so 80s and it's so campy, and they're supposed to be these horrifying gimmicks, but they're really come off corny. Did you kind of think that at the time, or you're not even like,
Oh,
whatever?
John, I had thought, and I thought I portrayed it fairly well, a serious heel. I
Hmm.
knew what I was doing here. It was literally cutting my own throat, but I knew, uh, the end justified the means. And I needed to turn him heel. I needed to turn him heel. Hey, everybody has a shelf life. And this country, we love to tear down heroes, but we love to see them rise from the ashes.
Hmm.
So when he became a heel, they wanted to boo him, especially when he said, "I fooled you." I said, "Take your prayers and say your prayers and take your vitamins." But when he rose from the ashes as a heel, he became a bigger baby face. So I think that it was the right thing for me to do, and I think it was the right thing for the company.
With this group, so eventually Avalanche, who's John Tent, is then going to become the Shark. Who's creating that crazy, weird gimmick?
And I never understood how John became the shark. You know what I mean? I never understood that. All of a sudden, I was told that he's the shark. And I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the correlation to, you know, if you're a shark, you gotta win. I think. You know what I mean? Right?
Well, is that Hogan again and Tenta making it up?
Uh, I'm not sure if John came up with the idea, but you got to realize too, these guys were very loyal to Hulk, and rightfully so. That if Hulk came up with the name Cowflap, they were going to say yeah. And that's no disrespect for them because it wasn't that they were just followers. They believed in Hulk because they had drawn huge money in New York with them.
Mhm.
So, and Hulk could be very persuasive because his track record in drawing money was second to none. It was not even close to the business, was it?
No. Mm-mm. Definitely not. Now you also add in Kamala, who makes sense in the group when you think about it. I mean, he's just a weird kind of 80s style character. Drew huge money with Hogan in 1987, leading up to and late 86, leading up to WrestleMania 3. So I mean, you could see why Kamala's added to the group. Did you think he added to the group, or did you think this okay, there's another 80s guy that's probably not going to work in 1995?
Well, I was on the fence of him not working in 1995, but Kamala had drawn big money too. The other thing is that people forget we had signed a deal with New Japan. Kamala was a huge star in Japan.
Yep.
He turned me babyface in Japan. And I knew what James could do in the ring. Okay, with a character like Kamala who had all that exposure in New York, wrestled Hogan, wrestled The Undertaker, what could you have done with him except be Kamala? Could he become Big James Harris again? I don't think
Nope.
so. He fit in, to me, where there's a willing suspension of disbelief with Kamala that the rest of us until later on didn't have. So because he had that, he was Kamala. He kept his name, and he had all that exposure in New York, and it was good because the Japanese liked him.
Absolutely. Now, then you're going to add in Ming, who makes sense in a certain sense. Maybe that weird headdress thing that he had, that weird kind of looking. I don't even know what it was, lion or whatever the heck it was. That headdress. Was there or Dragon? I think it was, but very weird. I think Ming kind of fit the group. Probably the best worker in the group, but that's for sure. What did you think about adding Ming to the fray?
First of all, I love Ming. I mean, one of the things I've always got, I told, Jacob Fatu when I managed him one time a couple of years ago, I said, "You're my fourth generation of Samoans I've worked with." One of the things about the Island Boys, they all know how to work. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And 98% of them look fabulous. And the other thing is, Ming added credibility to us. You could look at the rest of us, but except for the mask, and then later on he dropped that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Time goes on, Ming would give you an A+ match every time he went out there.
And then he's like, I wouldn't say he's really a member of the group, but he's kind of a member of the group. Big Van Vader, because of his hatred of Hogan, he's showing up and stuff. Did you think Vader fit the group at all?
Here's why I think Vader fit the group. If you could split the group down, it was me trying to slowly push Hogan into the reality based wrestling. And with Vader and Ming
Hmm.
and Kamala, because of all the exposure, it started to go a little bit more that way. And we know what the money Vader drew. And
Hmm.
again, he was uh, a welcome addition to our company because of his relationship with Japan. So to have him on our thing, meaning the dungeon, it helped, I think, add a little credibility. Not
And
that
as
tipped.
Right, I got you. As the dungeon is moving along, and you're in this, literally in that dungeon, and it kind of looks like a, dim, dark, bad horror movie, something like. Who's creating that set and putting that together for the dungeon for you and the master?
The dungeon where we did all those vignettes. Is that what you
Yep,
talk about? It
yep.
was a company in Tampa that did that, and I think maybe Hulk had an idea, and they kind of, they storyboarded it, and we did them. I think in 2 days. My memory serves me right, and it was in a warehouse where they built that stuff. These people actually, they weren't fly by night. They did stuff for Hollywood too.
Cool set, but maybe didn't fit with wrestling. You know what I mean. Like, I don't know if it necessarily fit with where WCW wanted to be headed in 1995.
No, it was not where we wanted to head. And I mean, I'm sure Eric felt the same way. In fact, I know he felt the same way. But you gotta remember this, we, not we, people, I don't know if a lot of people know this. Hogan was not on a WCW contract, he was on a personal service contract to Turner. There can't be any more power than that, right?
Right.
And wanting him to be comfortable to me was the most important thing because it was like we're playing chess. I'm going to move my knight out, and he's going to come with his bishop, and I'm trying to get him to play the game, and he wins. That he feels confident that I can direct him the right way. That I'm not going to have him do anything that he's not comfortable with. And then when he turned heel, it was the biggest pop of the history of biggest turn at that time in pro wrestling.
Yeah, no doubt about that. What's Bischoff's role creatively at this point? Because it's so many times he said that he had nothing to do with the Dungeon of Doom. He's kind of saying he's like that was Kevin Sullivan, almost saying like I had nothing to do with Dungeon of Doom. What was his creative input at this time?
Probably he didn't have much, but it wasn't that. It was all my ideas because I was given the ingredients to work
Hmm.
with,
Yep.
Whether I did it right or wrong, I'm not sure, but I certainly couldn't put those guys, Discount Ming and Barbarian later and Vader, I certainly couldn't put those guys in matches with Dr. Death or Mike Rotunda or the Steiners. You know, they were directed. It was like uh, I was doing a Basic Instinct movie along with Plan 9 from Outer Space in between the
Yep.
movie. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And it was hard to do that balancing act. And it was hard for me, too, personally, because, as I said, I had been a pretty serious heel. And I knew I had to get him so comfortable to work outside of not working with friends. It took me a long time to gain his trust. And I think it took a lot of those guys a long time to gain his trust. So it was, again, I'm repeating myself, but it was the ends that justified the means.
Yep. Yep. Now, I think the best addition to the Dungeon of Doom would be in 95, well, Fall Brawl 95, really, when the giant, Paul White, makes his debut, comes down, snaps Hogan's neck, saves you from the 5 minutes alone of you getting your ass kicked. I was like, first of all, this guy's a giant. Second of all, he looks great. Third of all, is he really related to Andre? And then fourth was like, this guy is just huge monster, but athletic as hell. The way he just jumped over the rope, you're like, Jesus Christ, who is this guy? So that
Right.
was so interesting. Where did he kind of come from? Did Hogan bring him in from the Monster Factory?
Yeah.
How was he kind of
Oh,
brought in?
wasn't in a monster factory. Somehow, and I probably don't have the story right, but this is the legend. Somehow Paul was playing basketball in a minute league around Chicago, and Jimmy Hart and Hulk ran into him when they saw him. And at that time, Paul had a manager, and the manager came up to him, and Hulk saw him and said, I mean, hey, at that period, WrestleMania 3, wasn't it Hogan and him, the biggest of all times, Andre and Hogan?
Yes.
So, hey, he thought he was hit, lightning strikes twice.
Yeah. And really, if you think about it, I mean, the giant, obviously green as hell at this point, but wow,
Right.
did he have potential? I mean, like that mold of clay, it's like you don't get 7 foot plus guys that in shape and like that athletic, right? I mean, he's a freak of nature.
Oh, yeah, and he was really athletic. That was the thing. And the other thing is, don't forget this, John, how young he was. What
Yeah.
was he back then? 23, 24?
I think it was like 23. Yeah, it's super, super young and new to the business.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah.
And he got a push, obviously right away. His debut is the beating up the biggest star of all time and snapping his neck. Is that kind of can you get any more grandiose than the debut than beating up Hulk?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. And I think, that was Hulk's idea. I mean, he knew here's the thing. Maybe I've been sounding hard on Hulk. First of all, Hulk knows what draws money. He's a Florida boy.
Hmm.
He watched these television programs, so he knew what draw money.
Hmm.
He drew money with Andre, and he drew money with Paul. And with Paul, it wasn't hard because of what you said. You're watching that as a kid, and you see this supposedly 7'3" or 4" inch guy jump over and snap Hogan's neck. That's how you get somebody over. He got him over, and they drew money, big money for a guy that hadn't had. How many matches did he have before the first pay per view? 4, 5.
Yeah, it was
Think of
very
that.
little. Yeah.
Yeah, very little. And I got to give Hulk credit on that. Sometimes people don't give Hulk credit being smart. He's a very smart. He couldn't been not been very smart. Uh, if he didn't know how to draw money, he was very smart, and he knew what worked. You know, and I think he knew what didn't work too. but he had to feel comfortable. That was the main thing. Like, he felt that he got screwed in the AWA, and I think that stuck with him. And he knew, you got to remember, he left New York. I don't know what the story was, but he could never have left New York, right? And never had the run in WCW, but he just knew what was right for him. His famous line, "It doesn't work for me, brother."
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And I feel like with the Giant, obviously the next pay per view that Halloween Havoc '95, which we can get into at another time because it is. I mean, it's so much going on with the monster trucks at the top of the building and this and that. But basically, the gist of it, Jimmy Hart turns heel on Hogan. Does it make more sense to him as a heel? Kind of, he made no sense with Hogan, right?
I never thought, first of all, I've never been a big babyface manager. I mean, what do they do? You got to keep beating them up. You know what I mean? And that gets repetitious. And Jimmy was a great heel manager in Memphis. Jimmy was my manager in Memphis when I was in
Hmm.
Memphis.
Yep.
Jimmy is a tremendous manager as heel. He didn't need to be with Hulk. You know what I mean? And that's real. And then there's, you got a turn there. There's a story there. Jimmy turning on Hulk.
Yep.
And people forget that Jimmy was a heel manager in New York.
And if you think about it, the Giant, like you said, he's so green, he's so young, literally almost too new to the business, but he's such a big clump of clay and such a big, massive potential. He needs a manager. So, right, Jimmy Hart's the perfect manager for him.
Right, right. And the other thing is, Jimmy's was a slight guy. You know what I mean? He isn't a big guy, and the contrast to size worked perfectly.
Yep. Now, what about the Yeti, as Tony Schiavone likes to call him, the Yeti? Ron Reese makes his debut. Was it supposed to be somebody else? I always heard a rumor like they were thinking about making, if the Warrior was available, it could have been Warrior. If Yoko was available, it could have been Yoko. Was it always going to be Ron Reese under some horrible toilet paper costume?
I have no idea how Ron got there. I knew that he was promoted from the camp. And the other thing is, you got to realize Hulk's thing was beating big guys in New York, right?
Yep.
He saw another big guy and he thought, well, we'll throw this. I don't know where the gimmick came from. And I'm not saying I may have come up with it, but I know you would have thought that. I'm going to say somebody's thinking process is there's another big guy to go after Hogan, but we got to wrap him up in something because we can't have him look exactly like Paul. Paul has just got tights and boots on, right?
Mhm.
We're going to go to an extreme, and you know, he was. Ron was a very nice guy. I think that he was saddled with a gimmick that was impossible to get over, and he was still green when he came to TV.
Did you think eventually, as the Giant continues his feud with Hogan, did you think, they put the title on him, obviously, then they take it off and say there's, the controversy because of the contract signed by Jimmy Hart, that the DQ, you become the winner. It was all this confusion. So World War III, Savage wins. He becomes the world champion. Hogan technically doesn't go over the rope. He goes under. And they did that whole kind of funny gimmick where Hogan goes to see the tape, brother, and the tape is destroyed when they go to watch it. So that's kind of funny. So then there's tension, of course, with him and Savage. Did you think that Hogan Giant was the right thing? And did you think that maybe too much too soon for the big man?
At this time, if you're going to make an impact, you got one chance to make a first impression. And what would you have done with them? Built them up like we did Goldberg? I don't think so. I think that Hulk wanted it right away, and he knew he could work around his shortcomings. And I think, personally, I think he made the right decision to go with him right away. Because
I
the
think
longer he stayed out there, he would have been exposed by other people. And here's the other thing. John, can you hold on 1 second?
Yep, yep. No
Okay.
problem. So as we're talking here about the Dungeon of Doom with Kevin, he'll be back in just 1 second. Talking about the Dungeon of Doom here, and it's just one of those things where it's like the Giant was feuding with Hogan, but they also had Macho Man Randy Savage feuding with Ric Flair at this point, which is a much more realistic angle. Miss Elizabeth will turn heel on Macho Man, align herself with Flair. It becomes much more real. Hogan at this point was feuding with the Giant in a little bit of a cartoony thing. Me and Kevin were just talking about Halloween Havoc. That whole thing with the Yeti was very, very cartoony and very bad. The monster truck rally at the top of the building was one of those things where it's like, that's not really believable and corny and it's kind of bad. Hogan knocks the Giant off the building. You think the Giant's dead. He comes back out later in the night and they still have the match. Very, very campy, very cartoony. Didn't really particularly work, I think, very well at that point in time. Did not really enjoy it. I enjoyed much of the other things that were going on in WWE. The tension with Luger and Sting, with Luger being a heel and Sting being a babyface, but Luger aligning himself with Jimmy Hart and kind of half aligning himself with the Dungeon of Doom. You had Ric Flair, like I just mentioned, feuding with Savage, but it's much more realistic. I mean, they're talking about, I know they weren't married at this point in real life, but and storyline wise, you think Savage and Elizabeth are married. So one of those things. But as we welcome Kevin back in, Kevin, as you were saying with the Giant and the Hulkster, that, do you think that that feud worked? You're saying basically it worked because it wasn't overexposing the Giant, who may have gotten overexposed as green.
Yeah, because here's the thing. I'm not gonna bring up the specific match, but I booked Goldberg one time and on the streak, and he got exposed, and I didn't want
Regal,
that. Yeah, I
Regal,
didn't
yeah.
want that. Yeah, I didn't want that happen to the Giant because you never know. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And isn't that guys are doing it intentionally? They think it's a way to get a guy over that goes a little bit longer. You don't do that with somebody so green like Paul.
Hmm.
And he's drawn big, huge money the rest of his career. So I think he started off the right way. And he's going to end it the right way.
Now, I was briefly saying here that I like the other things going on in WCW, much more realistic. Savage versus Flair and Elizabeth turning and that whole thing that was very realistic, very hit home, very a little bit of shoot in there too with Elizabeth and Randy. I like Sting and Luger. That was awesome. Sting's the babyface, Luger's the heel. Luger kind of loosely with Jimmy Hart and the Dungeon of Doom, but he's still best friends with Sting. I thought that was really well done. How cool was it, or did you think how well it worked? I love it still to this day. I love that feud. Not really feud. It's like the team of Sting and Luger, but Luger is a heel. He's aligned with Jimmy Hart. He's aligned with the Dungeon of Doom, kind of. Is that just clever writing? But he's Sting's best friend.
I think that was the best Luger ever was portrayed. He just hit that spot perfectly because it was close to his personality at the time. And that, to me, makes a good story when you have somebody close to their personality.
Yes. Yep.
And Luger
Absolutely.
played that excellent, and Sting did too. That's one of my most proudest moments, I think, and that people don't bring that up much. Luger was terrific then. Terrific. It gave him another dimension that he never had before, and I believe after that people was and they were enjoying his bullshit, making excuses and oh, glad you're here. Uh, I'm sorry I'm late. He was just so dead on, and they did a magnificent job. And I would love to go back and look at the ratings and see when their segment came on. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say they drew a quarter of WWF at the time's audience off of Raw. When people people don't understand, John, how over that segment was when Luger and Sting did it, because it was so refreshing. And I got that idea when I was a baby face and Austin Idol was a heel. And Jim Barnett, this was his idea. Uh, uh, Idol had turned babyface, and all the babyfaces accepted him except me. I wouldn't accept them. And he was wrestling Mark Lewin, and they had me go out like I was going to the concession stand in the arena. And Abdullah came down and jumped on Austin, and the people actually pushed me to the ring. And I used to make my interviews saying, I can't believe every time I get up in the morning and look in the mirror and see what I'll do for money to be this guy's partner. So I just tweaked it a little, and they were so, so good. Uh, I thought some nights they carried the whole 2 hours.
Yep.
They were fabulous.
Loved it. It's so funny. Luger would use the roller quarters and then and knock out Harlem Heat. They win the tag titles, whatever. And then Sting would be like, "What the hell is this?" You'd be like, I don't know where that came from." And then the fans would try to touch Luger,
Yeah,
and Sting would be looking, and he'd give him the five. And as soon as Sting would turn his back, he'd be like, "Don't touch me!" Oh, gross fans. Like so good.
yeah. And he played that so well, And Lex, sometimes gets a bad rap. And I never, ever had any resistance from Lex Luger in a finish, an angle. Of course, like everybody else, he'd question some things, but I mean, never a problem. He gets a bad rap. Uh, not everybody could work like Eddie Guerrero.
Right.
And I'm not comparing him to Eddie Guerrero, but Luger, what he might have lacked sometimes in punching ability and stuff like that, he made up for his presence. And in this episode's, I think he did an incredible job. Incredible.
Luger is underrated to me. I think he's awesome. People are like, oh, he's not a great worker. That's not really as important. He could be good and spur, especially when he had the right opponent. He could be great, but it's not really important. He had a presence, charisma, the look, the way he acted, the way he carried himself. He just, as soon as you look at the guy, you're like, this guy, he's somebody. He's a star. Love Luger. When he beats Hogan, going off the beaten path here, when he beats Hogan in '97 for the title, that crowd goes nuts. I mean, it was awesome. What a
Yeah,
moment for Nitro.
right, right. And I'm
Now,
with you,
just
John. People don't understand how over he was.
mhm.
I remember him putting the rack on Flair in Baltimore, but he had bled, and the people
Yes.
went crazy. But the athletic commission in Baltimore would allow blood. I had to talk to the uh, head of the athletic commission to get that passed, because usually they would stop immediately with blood. And
Right,
the guy's
right.
name was Chester O'Sullivan. And I had to go up to him and beg. He said, well, I'm going to have my guys leave early, but this is the last time you'll ever do this. I said, okay, thank you. But I mean, Luger doesn't get the credit he deserves.
Totally agree. Now, just kind of just a random thought, and I was just thinking about this because we skipped over him. Not that he's important to this specific story, but Evad Sullivan, Dave
Yeah,
Sullivan, originally the Equalizer. He does kind of look like you, obviously, like a taller version of you. Dave Sullivan, where does this Evad, with the rabbit and everything, where does this gimmick and this character come from? Very silly, very cartoonish, very 1980s.
that was before I even got in the territory. They had made him, I think they had made him Evad before I got there. and he was talking about his big brother coming in. Oh, he's got big hands, he's got big feet. He's so big. He's so big. He's so big. And again, he was a baby face, and I was a heel because I've been in Atlanta for a long time, off and on. And the Nasty Boys were beating him up, and I came to the ring and I threw fire on them, and that's how we went with the angle.
Yeah, that angle's awesome. Yep.
Yeah, and him and Hogan, he became the number one Hulkamaniac. So
Why? They had nothing like that's what they wanted for him.
I think it was to show you could never do this in today's day, but he was supposedly dyslexic and a little slow, and it was showing that Hulk had compassion. He was a Hulkamaniac, and Hulkamaniacs come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. So that's
I
where that
believe he, I believe he became a pretty good football coach. I believe in
yes,
college
he
football
did.
ranks.
Nebraska, right?
I think so. Yeah, I know he's big into football and he's big into football equipment. He was doing something with the equipment too.
Really, he's a good guy.
So just moving along, just another random guy that joins the Dungeon of Doom, kind of Loch Ness Haystacks Jr. I guess. Really, where the heck did he come from? You just got him
Big,
from England, I guess. You're like, oh, he fits the group.
huge star in England. Okay, I booked him on a Saturday night, and he drew. I forget who he worked with. He drew a 4-5, the biggest Saturday night we had that year. He had drawn. He was called Giant Haystacks in England. And if you ask the English guys, Regal and Finley and those guys,
Yep.
they'll tell you he drew nothing but huge money in England. And at this time, I started to look around what is missing with WCW. There was the international flair. Because after that, when I brought Conan in, he helped me get Rey Mysterio and open the doors for the Luchadors. And Regal mentioned Fit Finley, and Terry Funk told me he was one of the 5 best workers he ever saw. So I brought him in, and I wanted to give the show a international flair, but to legitimize the international stuff. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
We had like, and then I kind of mockered it with Regal, who did a tremendous job with Bobby Eaton, right? You know,
Yes.
Sir Bobby Eaton, and
The
back in
Earl of Eaton.
and John, if you remember, back in the day, everybody was from Singapore or parts unknown or whatever. So I wanted to make it legit, and I thought just by adding legitimacy to where somebody came from, it also added a legitimacy to the business.
Yeah. Now, as far as like the Dungeon of Doom at this point, they're going to then team up with the Four Horsemen and you and Arn. I mean, we'll talk more in detail about a lot of this stuff in future episodes. But basically, the alliance to end Hulkamania is this almost like wow, you need 20 guys to beat Hulk and Savage, and maybe a
That
little bit of Sting and his friend. Like, is that almost overkill? Is that crazy, or is that making Hogan comfortable?
it was making Hogan comfortable, but I knew at this time I had to get the baby faces hot because I didn't know what was coming, but I knew around the corner I was going to dump all kinds of heat on the heels. So I'm a heel booker, and I said, you know, you can't be a knight in shining armor killing salamanders. You have to slay dragons.
Right.
So I got to get these guys, before me, they had been doing 50-50 booking. And I said, okay, we got to polish the armor up. We got to take their swords and grind them down. And let's get these guys up and running before we make the heel turn.
The Alliance then Hulkamania then adds in Z Gangsta, which is Tiny Zeus Lidster Zeus, and the Ultimate Solution, Zeet Swenson. I mean, just these two mammoth freaking guys. Was that just totally 80s? I mean, where did they come from? Did you bring them in? Like, who's bringing them in? I mean, that seems like a little bit at a time, at a touch.
Well, it was not just a little out of touch. What do those two guys have in common, John? Do you know?
Both movie stars, right? Technically, or
Who
both
else?
gigantic.
Both what you said, but the first thing you hit it on the head. What did Hulk? What was Hulk doing at that time?
Trying to get in the movies.
What did Jeep Swenson work with? Arnold, right?
Arnold, yeah, yep,
Okay. What did
yep.
Jesse Ventura? Who did Jesse Ventura work with?
Arnold, yeah.
Was there a little thing between Jesse and Hulk?
Oh yeah, big time. Hmm,
Yeah.
interesting. And obviously, he knows Zeus, no holds barred, feuded with him in
That,
WWF.
what? Which was what? A movie produced by the WWE, right?
Yep,
So
yep.
that's where
You know,
that came.
it's just almost like wow. So Hogan and Savage are in this cage match at Uncensored. This, the Terror Dome, the tower cage, the three-tiered cage. It's just like almost unbelievable. I know you try to put their back up against the wall and no one thinks they're going to win. They end up winning, but it's one of those things where it's like, wow. I mean, we'll get into this on a further episode in further detail. But as a fan, I was like, okay, I liked Sting and Booker against the Road Warriors, whatever whatever else is going on that night. But I was like, that I don't know about that.
No, that was, and no disrespect to Hulk, but I think he was on a fishing expedition.
Hmm.
That he also could bring guys from the movies into his world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder. I wonder, like, I know they're only going to be there for a short time, but I wonder if he actually thought like that would be something that would just help him out or help the Dungeon of Doom, or was it primarily just like, okay, I'm just going to beat these two monsters and we're just going to move on to the next one. I need some more, like you said, I need some more dragons to slay.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, he knew what worked for him. He had a formula. Big guys, I sell, I hulk up, I drop the leg. And he knew what worked for him. And when you get comfortable, and I always say this, and if someone's listening to us that's a booker, the worst thing you can do is fall into patents because it's a way to burn out quickly. And sometimes you should put your best match you got on first. Uh, don't save it to last. Put it on first. Make the people come say, "Oh, gee, we missed that last week." Uh, but he fell into a pattern that worked, and you cannot knock it because it drew millions of dollars. But it was, as we see later on, the time is coming for the change.
With the Dungeon of Doom, you'll see, Hogan starts dressing in black. You guys making him dark. You're slowly getting more into that. You end up at one point shaving his mustache. Is that
Right.
all Hulk's idea, or this is your idea of where you want Hulk to be?
The shaving of the mustache was he was going to do that movie where he played Zeus. Remember the
Oh yeah, yeah, yep.
he couldn't have a mustache because the movie didn't have him having a mustache. So he used it for an angle to get heat on us.
Makes sense. Very smart.
Yeah, it was very smart.
Him wearing black, your idea or his?
His idea, and let me tell you, that was you picked up on something really cool, John. That was the night I think that it finally hit him that I was right. If you look back at that interview, Hulk is coming down with a black bandana, all in black, right? We're in Chicago. The building's booing him.
Hmm.
And what's Mean Gene? What he says? You can hear the somber night tonight from the fans. He he saved Hulk. They were booing him. He was saying the aura of the building was horror. You know what I mean?
Hmm. As if
And,
something was going on that night. Yeah. Yep.
and he did an incredible job on thinking on his feet. And that night when I got to him, I said, "What I told you all along is it's starting to make sense." And he said, "Let me run it by, brother." You know, so he started to see, maybe for the first time, it hit him in the face that, boy, I could turn and maybe make a lot of money.
And as we move forward in '96, the Scott Hall, Kevin Nash debut, Hogan's heel turn at Bash to the Beach, which we've talked about before. It's one of those things where it's like the Dungeon of Doom are now not maybe if they were 1 and 1A with the Horsemen as the top heel group, it's like, well, now the NWO is one and everyone else falls in two, three, four behind them, right? So now the Dungeon of Doom aren't as powerful. The Hogan and the NWO is the top heel group.
Yeah, and the dungeon was actually went from going for Hogan to actually letting the NWO pick our bones. Uh, you know the famous one we talked about in Orlando, right? They came down with the Horsemen against the Dungeon. Oh, they're here. Remember?
Yep.
We run the back. Before that, we had a main event, the Dungeon, a four-way, the Dungeon against the Horsemen, and we drew a huge number. And they came down and picked each one of us off. You know the NWO, and that was in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it was perfect to me. Was they could come down and pick our bones when we've gone 10 or 15 minutes and two of us are hurt. You know, one of the horsemen gets hurt, one of the dungeon gets hurt, two other guys are in the ring. They come down and just lay all 8 guys out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Basically dismantled, like you said, like dismantled the dungeon, and the dungeon would add guys like Big Bubba Rogers. I don't know if he really makes sense, but he would be in the dungeon, but then he would join the NWO eventually.
But
Conan would be in the dungeon. I don't think he really fit that group, although he's a great wrestler and great charisma. Right? Do you think Conan fit?
no, Conan should have been on his own. Conan is got a. The other thing about Conan was he brought the Hispanic audience with him. A lot of people don't give him credit for that. He brought, Carlos is half Cuban, half Puerto Rican, and wrestled. He was a huge star in Mexico. So he brought three of the factions of the Hispanics to us. And especially in, Miami, that means a lot.
The guy I was forgetting, Hugh Morris, Bill DeMott, he actually fit the group when you brought him,
Yeah.
right? I mean, he fit perfectly.
Yes. I met Bill in Japan and I gave him a job. He was a big, impressive guy, could move, super strong. He could do anything. Bill was a wonderful performer.
I feel like underrated. A lot of people don't realize he
Yeah,
was a damn good wrestler, good athlete. Underrated.
way underrated. I saw him in Japan. I was there the first time he tried a moonsault in the afternoon, and I couldn't believe he hit it. You know what I mean? We put a big pad out for him, a mat. It was like an amateur wrestling mat. We rolled it up into a tight circle, and he did the moonsault. I couldn't believe, that's the first time I saw a guy that big do one.
Unbelievable. He had a great moonsault for sure.
Yeah.
No laughing matter, as he called it.
Cool.
A guy you brought up before definitely fit the Dungeon of Doom. Another awesome wrestler, the Barbarian. When he got put in the group, he fit in.
Oh, I mean, the Barbarian's the real deal, and that helped out, and especially having Ming and Barb together as a tag team or singles. I knew I was going to get an incredible match, either or, and they were so solid. It kind of gave us again a little bit more respectability.
Yeah, when you put Ming and Barbarian out there, it's the Faces of Fear. I mean, they're an awesome tag team.
Yeah,
Definitely really good. Now, Max Muscle was in at one point. I just thought like that was weird, kind of didn't make sense, right? I mean, it's like, kind of forcing him, I guess, trying to get him some TV time.
yeah, he was a friend of Dallas's, and he got put in the group, and he wasn't there long. He was a very nice guy.
Very short time in was Braun the Leprechaun. He was thrown in there. Very cartoonish, very
Very,
80s.
yeah.
And then a guy who I loved in the group and kind of wasn't there long enough was One Man Gang when he was in the group.
I love the one man gang. I mean, the gang is one of the nicest people you could ever meet. And the gang drew a lot of money. And again, a guy that drew money with Hogan, right, as a Keen.
Yep. Yep.
And he fit perfectly. Again, another one of the family members of Hogan's
Yeah,
team.
another guy. Yep. Now, somebody that got thrown in there female wise was Miss Jacqueline. who
Yeah.
was going to be your partner against basically Benoit woman. But what do you think about Miss Jackie? She's kind of doesn't fit the group in the sense of like the Hulk hater stuff, but she fits in there with you because she's tough, can work, and she's going to help you and get your back.
And what I was going to push for, and this is kind of me breaking my rules, but she was so tough, legitimately tough. I was going to put her over in a match.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I was going to put her over because if you notice that we were building up to it, I kept on saying the only guy that can beat her is me. The only guy that can beat her is me. And I was going to have a split between her and me. It might not have been a match, but she was going to knock me out. And she probably could have done it in real life.
She was definitely tough. Now, as the Dungeon of Doom, basically, the Giant will join the NWO and then break off from the NWO, and then he's going to turn babyface and feud with Hogan, which was really well done. We'll get into that, of course, on a future episode. But like the Dungeon of Doom is losing members and it's kind of losing power. Eventually, it becomes the first family with Jimmy Hart, and he has Ming and Barbarian, and he has Knobs and Jerry Flynn, and of course, he'll kind of still be there, but not be a top heel group when you retire and lose your retirement match to Benoit in '97, is that basically like Dungeon Doom is over at that point?
Yeah,
Basically, you're writing them off really as your retirement.
right. And here's the thing: we got to where we needed to be. Hogan turned heel. There was
Hmm.
no need for comedy anymore. We were stone cold. Uh, don't mean to use that term, stone cold, but we were getting more and more serious as the weeks went on.
Now, the end of the Dungeon of Doom is just one of those things where it's like, okay, we're going to move on. You still have the Horsemen. Obviously, the NWO was hot to trot, still '97 and even into '98 was still the definite biggest angle in wrestling for WCW. Now, as far as you retire, you're still booking, obviously, but if you think about this, it's like, where did the Dungeon of Doom come from? So you're just thinking of, okay, it's definitely because of Hogan, and it felt the need, and it worked because it got him to turn heel, it got him to join the NWO. If you go back and you listen to Bischoff, you say, where did it come from? He was saying that there was some psychedelic drugs. I think he's joking, obviously, but he's saying there's some psychedelic drugs going on between you and Hogan, and that's where the Dungeon of Doom was formed. I know he's kind of joking, but it almost sounds it sounds legit.
It sounds legit. It sounds legit. I mean, I don't think. Hopefully, if I was on a trip, I'd come up with something a little bit cleaner. But uh, you know, I think he did it in jest. But I look back at it now, and it's like I heard Terry Taylor say something just recently when someone said he gave you the Red Rooster gimmick, meaning Vince. And he said, "Yeah, and that's why people still remember me." Well, the Dungeon of Doom, as you said, all of a sudden, this number one wanted to hear about it, and I like to take credit for it all, but Hogan laid it out, and I kind of piecemealed it together and did it the best of my abilities.